All right, so coming to standing, we're going to circle. So if you already did some stretching, or if you just started with this end of the chair part and did some of that with us, hopefully this circling feels a little different. This feels a little bit more like you have a little bit more space in there. So if you've been sitting all day, of course, you ought to do this longer just to get the synovial fluid around the joint and warm up the ligaments and everything, that the cuff that goes around your the head of your femur. So I'm gonna kind of just review what it was if you kind of came in at a funny time, what we were talking about in this width thing. Width of the body, gapping the joint, the strength of a joint that is properly gapped as opposed to a joint that is mashing together and then, more prone to osteoporosis or osteoarthritis because it's bone on bone. All right, so hopefully you did just see that. But if you just stand for a moment, because we're gonna do a standing Qigong, and you find if you lift one knee and then you lift the other knee, you feel those little tendons pop out. You kind of want to drop your fingers inside those tendons that are popping out, and just it's in your mind's eye. But you want to think that if you dropped your fingers inside that tendon, you could kind of just bring your hips apart a little bit. You're just opening the hip joint. Okay, so I'm going to step into a channel. We're going to step into a channel instead of a horse stance. We're just going to do a different Qigong tonight. So as I gap, I get a little wider, thinking that I have width from finger to finger, from hip to hip. Okay, I'm just going to let that settle in, because as I do that, oftentimes what happens is my tailbone will naturally just kind of lower. And then from there, I'm going to let my arms just hang and then open the width of my collarbone. Same thing, just like as though the collarbone was smiling. Open up the armpit, open up the elbows, and then from the core up to the heart, lift. Okay, shoulder blades together and down. Lift up through the ears or the apex of your crown. Lift your thumbs, and then push your elbows out as your hands come in to the middle. Okay, so we're just going to do a slightly different Qigong. This is really, really open, and I'm just turning towards my back toe and turning towards my front toe. So I'm warming up my channel. And I want to keep the front of the body open, the chest open, by pushing out slightly through the elbows. They are slightly pointed down, but they're also pushing out as the hands come in. And I'm folding the front hip, and I'm folding the back hip, and the whole time I'm trying to keep the knee with the toe. And you can add more to this exercise simply by turning your back more, not by turning your knees, but from the base of your spine, the L5, and then turning the spine a little bit more so that the opposite hand comes towards the opposite foot. So I'm getting a nice spinal twist. And I get to use my legs to help to push that twist. I have the support of the earth to push around into that spinal twist. Okay, and then I'm gonna open up the back, drop and let my low back open and slide across, and then lift my heart in the front and let the L4, L5 stretch open, come across. Same thing, I'm lifting up. Now the trick here, when I lift up, is to keep my front knee tracking with my front toe and keeping the tailbone down. Drop, stretch the low back, swing across, and then lift up. It's a little easier to keep the back knee tracking, but you want to, the knee that you leave, you want to make sure it stays with your toe. So there is an element of doing work inside the hip joint to be able to do all this with your spine and stay stable in your lower body. Here we go back one more time, and we're going to lift. This time we're going to do a side bend. So we side bend and open up the low back, and then come up over the front foot, and then side bend going back, open up the low back, lift the heart, side bend going forward, lift the heart, side bend going back, lift the heart. Making sure that you feel that your elbows are pushing out slightly so your back, upper back stays active in carrying your arms. It's a really good waist toner, and you know, it really uses your spine in all the directions. Come back, we're going to peel up the foot and turn back to the front. Just for a moment, we're going to let the hands, elbows bend, and the hands come down the front of the body. And just take a moment to take a little rest with your arms, because we're going to do the same tendon thing for the other side. So the natural width for my stance generally is going to be about half of my shoulder width. But what happens is people often close the channel. And so if you close your channel, you're going to squish your upper body because they want to mirror each other. And it's a lot more difficult to keep your balance. So if instead I find those little major tendons of my quads, and I just hook my fingers and just kind of pull them apart and open the back and sit down. And you could bring your heel in, but you can't bring your, that foot has to at least stay in the line. The foot that's going out has to stay in the line that is, it's on already. Step out and just feel like you sit down by opening the space across the front, opening up the low back, sitting down. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing for the arms. So coming across under the clavicle is the way the clavicle just got wider, and we open up the space under the armpit and bring the elbows out, and then from your dantian up, lift your heart, and then shoulder blades together and down, lift up through the neck to the crown, pick up the thumbs, and round in. Okay, so I'm going to turn towards the back toes, being careful that I keep the front knee tracking with the front toes, which takes a certain education inside my hip joint, and then turning towards the front toes, keeping the back knee with the back toe. So this first part, just doing this, the simple spinal twist, it's a good time to focus on, you know, a slight hip fold to get across, because we know the hip folds govern our horizontal across the horizon movement. But we can also focus on making sure that we keep the knee with the toe, especially when we leave it. So when I leave that toe, I got to make sure that knee stays with that toe, which is a big thing and a release in the hip. And then when I leave that toe, I have to keep that knee with that toe. My elbows are pushing out a little bit just to keep my back engaged so I don't get too tight in the front of my body, the front of my shoulders and my pecs. A study of horizontal movement across the plane in a channel. Then it's vertical movement. So I drop down and I'm opening up my L5, L4. I sweep across. Same thing. I got to keep the knee I left with the toe. Then I get to lift my heart and then drop back down and stretch the L4, L5, L3, sweep across. Keep the front knee with the front toe. There's big temptations to want to drag that knee in. So this is also an education. That's why I say it's an education for your hip, because your hip has a lot to do with why the knee wants to drag. I have to keep that hip open. And lower, swing across, and lift, and lower, and swing across, and lift, and lower, swing across, last time, lift, and lower, and go to the back one more time, and lift. This time we're gonna side bend to the front leg. So now we're making the movements very complicated because they're vertical and horizontal with a side bend. So here you have to not only pay attention to the intricacies of this movement, but that your knee stays with your toe in the channel, which asks a deeper, subtle stretch in my hip joint. Lift and side bend, open the back. Lift, side bend, open the back. Lift, side bend, open the back. Lift, side bend, open the low back. Okay, we're going to come back. And then when we lift on the back foot, peel up your front foot and step back. So because that movement is so multi-dimensional, it's not just straight across, you know, it's up and down. Your back also has to get an education as to how it carries my upper body, you know, the arms in that held position through all those different moves. And hopefully it gives your upper back a little education on moving in different dimensions so you don't get so boxed up in the front of the shoulder. Okay,